Why is it that silence can scream louder than words? Why is it that urgency can feel like a noose around your neck? Why do lies repeated again and again start to sound like the truth? Why do the ones closest to us sometimes wield guilt like a weapon? And why does the human mind so easily fracture when a third party is pulled into our battles? These questions aren't abstract riddles. They are the very traps that have controlled humanity for centuries. They are the subtle manipulations that break down our peace, twist our choices, and fracture our relationships. And yet, hidden inside each of these dark tactics lies the possibility of freedom, if you can see through them. Tonight, you and I will step into the arena of the mind. We will confront 5 of the most insidious psychological weapons ever used, and we will strip them of their power. By the end of this journey, you will not only recognize these tactics when they appear, you will know exactly how to dismantle them. And in doing so, you'll reclaim something deeper than freedom. You'll reclaim your sovereignty. If you're ready for that, then stay with me until the end, because there's a reason the manipulator wants you distracted, reactive, and powerless. And the only way out is through. But before we enter the first shadow, take a moment to anchor yourself. If this message resonates, if you're ready to step off autopilot and begin the path of mastery, subscribe to us at the Self-Mastery Movement, because every week we sharpen the tools you need to walk into the world awake, not asleep. Now let's begin. Imagine this. You've just had an argument with someone you love. Maybe it was small, maybe it was nothing. But suddenly the air goes cold. They stop responding. They refuse to meet your eyes. Hours pass, then days. Not a word. You replay the fight 100 times in your mind. What did you say wrong? What could you have done differently? You begin to shrink inside your own skin, desperate to break the silence, desperate to restore connection. This is the first shadow, the silent treatment. On the surface, it looks like immaturity, like pettiness. But underneath, it is control. It is punishment. It is a weapon designed to make you question your worth. Because silence, when used this way, doesn't just communicate nothing. It communicates that you are nothing. At first, it's small, a few hours of silence, a cold shoulder, but then it grows. Days of ignoring you, weeks of exile inside your own home. You find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, begging for the smallest scraps of acknowledgement, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the void again. And slowly, you lose your voice. Most people react in one of 2 ways. They chase, throwing themselves against the wall of silence until they collapse. Or they retaliate, creating their own silence in return, escalating the Cold War. But both are traps, because both accept the frame that silence equals power. Here's the truth. Silence only has the power you give it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." The silent treatment works because you allow your thoughts to dye themselves in shame and doubt. But silence itself is neutral. Silence is not an attack until you decide it is. The key, then, is to separate their silence from your worth. They withhold words, but you do not withhold peace. You reclaim agency by refusing to interpret their silence as a verdict on your value. You meet their void not with desperation, but with clarity. And this is not just philosophy. Neuroscience shows that social rejection lights up the same regions of the brain as physical pain. That's why silence feels like a knife. But unlike physical pain, you can intervene. You can reframe the meaning of silence in real time, short-circuiting the spiral. So let's move into the philosopher's gym, because theory means nothing unless it can be lived. When a partner retreats into silence instead of chasing, state calmly, "I will be here when you're ready to talk. Until then, I will not participate in this dynamic." That's not coldness. That's boundaries. When a colleague stonewalls you, redirect energy into the work itself. Do not hand them the satisfaction of your desperation. When family members ice you out, write. Journal your side of the story. Give your words a home, even if no one else listens. When friends withdraw, remind yourself. Their silence is their story, not your worth. And finally, practice silence deliberately in solitude. Meditate, sit in the void. Train your nervous system to find peace there. That way, when silence is weaponized against you, it no longer terrifies you. It strengthens you. So the next time someone uses silence to control you, remember, it is only a prison if you hand them the keys. But silence is just the first trap. The second doesn't starve you of words. It drowns you in urgency. Picture this. You walk into a store. A sign screams, "Limited time only." A countdown clock ticks on the website. A boss drops a contract on your desk and says, "I need an answer by the end of the day." Suddenly, your chest tightens. You rush to decide, to grab, to act. Anything to escape the pressure of the ticking clock. This is the second shadow, time pressure. At first, it feels harmless, a marketing gimmick, a deadline. But then it grows. It becomes the reason you bought things you didn't need. The reason you signed agreements you didn't fully read. The reason you said yes to relationships you weren't ready for. The manipulator knows when time feels scarce, your rational mind shuts down. This isn't speculation. Neuroscience proves it. Under time pressure, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, goes offline. The limbic system, your survival circuitry, takes over. You stop weighing options. You start grabbing at escape. The manipulator knows this. That's why every scam, every aggressive sale, every toxic ultimatum comes wrapped in urgency. And so you panic, you act, and then you regret. Most people try to solve this by making faster decisions, by becoming more efficient under pressure. But that's another trap, because the manipulator wants you in their frame of scarcity. The answer is not to act faster. The answer is to step outside the frame entirely. Time pressure collapses when you simply refuse to play, when you reclaim the right to pause, when you remind yourself almost nothing is truly urgent. The philosopher Seneca once wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it." What he meant is this: most urgency is an illusion. You have more time than they want you to believe. So in the philosopher's gym, the training looks like this. When confronted with a limited time offer, practice walking away. Tell yourself, if it's real, it will be there tomorrow. When a boss drops a last-minute demand, respond with clarity. "I'll need time to evaluate this fully before deciding." When a partner pushes you into rushed commitments, remember, love is patient. Pressure is manipulation. When scammers or marketers scream urgency, treat it as a red flag. The louder the countdown, the less valuable the offer. And finally, practice slowing down in everyday life. Drive in the slow lane. Eat without your phone. Train your body to resist false urgency. Because the moment you reclaim time, you reclaim your mind. But even if you resist silence and urgency, there is a deeper trap. One that doesn't starve you or rush you, but slowly reshapes your perception of reality itself. It is the third shadow, the illusory truth effect. Here's how it works. Repeat a lie often enough, and people start to believe it. It doesn't matter how absurd it is. Repetition breeds familiarity, and the brain confuses familiarity with truth. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Modern neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity. Every repeated thought carves grooves into your brain, and whether those thoughts are true or false doesn't matter. Familiarity alone makes them feel real. That's why propaganda works. That's why rumors spread. That's why advertising repeats slogans endlessly. The manipulator knows truth doesn't need to win, familiarity does. And so you begin to believe what you hear often enough. You believe you're unworthy because someone said it 100 times. You believe the product is best because the ad repeated it endlessly. You believe the rumor because everyone around you repeats it. Most people fight this by trying to argue, by debating every falsehood. But that's another trap, because repetition doesn't just affect them, it affects you. The more you repeat the lie, even in opposition, the deeper it embeds in your own subconscious. The only way out is vigilance. To remind yourself constantly, seen before does not mean true. Familiarity is not proof. Evidence is proof. So in the philosopher's gym, here is your training. When you see a claim repeated online, pause. Verify before you share. When you hear the same rumor from multiple people, ask yourself, Is this evidence or just repetition? When negative thoughts repeat in your own mind, counter them not with debate, but with action. Build new grooves with new truths. Keep a physical reminder, a sticky note, a mantra that says, "Seen before, not equal to true." And finally, expose yourself deliberately to diverse viewpoints. Break the echo chamber before it dyes your soul completely. The manipulator's weapon is repetition. Your shield is verification. But sometimes the attack doesn't come as silence, urgency, or lies. Sometimes it comes dressed as love. This is the fourth shadow, guilt tripping. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? If you loved me, you'd do this one thing. I guess I'll just do it myself. Sound familiar? Guilt tripping works because it exploits the part of you that wants to be good, the part that fears disappointing others, the part that confuses kindness with servitude. At first it's subtle, a sigh, a disappointed look. Then it grows. You find yourself saying yes when you want to say no. You find yourself exhausted, resentful, yet unable to stop, because every boundary feels like betrayal. Most people respond by giving in, by complying, by sacrificing their own needs to make the guilt stop. But this is surrender. It teaches the manipulator that guilt works, and so they use it again and again. The truth is this: you are not responsible for another person's emotions. You can acknowledge them, empathize with them, but you cannot own them. Their disappointment is not proof of your wrongdoing. It is proof of their expectation. The philosopher Epictetus said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." The manipulator wants you to judge yourself guilty, but the fact remains, guilt without wrongdoing is counterfeit. So in the philosopher's gym, your training is this. When someone says, "If you love me, you'd do this," respond calmly, "I do love you. And because I love you, I need to be honest about my limits." When someone sighs and says, "I guess I'll just do it myself," let them. Do not rescue them from their own manipulation. When family or colleagues weaponize past favors, remind them, "I appreciate what you did. And this decision still stands practice saying no without explanation." A boundary does not require a courtroom defense. And finally, remind yourself daily, self-care is not selfish. You do not need to destroy yourself to prove love. Guilt tripping dissolves when you stop confusing compliance with compassion. But there is one final shadow, one that fractures not only your peace, but your relationships themselves. This is the fifth shadow, triangulation. It happens when someone pulls a third party into your conflict. They compare you to someone else. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" They bring another voice into your argument. "Well, Sarah agrees with me." They create competition, jealousy, division, and suddenly the fight is no longer between you and them. It is between you and the ghost they have placed beside you. At first it's small, a casual comparison, but then it grows. You find yourself resenting the third party, competing for validation, trying to prove yourself. And the manipulator sits back, in control, while you and the ghost tear each other apart. Most people react by playing the game, by competing, by gossiping, by trying to win back favor. But this only deepens the trap, because triangulation thrives in secrecy and rivalry. The answer is radical directness. Pull the third party into the light. Refuse to speak through intermediaries. Refuse to compete with phantoms. Return the focus to the relationship itself. In the philosopher's gym, your training is this. When someone says, "Why can't you be like them?" respond, "Let's talk about me and you, not comparisons." When someone brings another's opinion into the conflict, say, "If they feel strongly, let's invite them to join the conversation." When gossip is used against you, refuse to participate. Insist on direct dialogue. When family members pit siblings against each other, step out of the triangle. Say, "That's between you and them. My relationship with you stands on its own." And finally, in relationships, if jealousy is provoked with mentions of others, recognize it as manipulation, not proof of your inadequacy. Triangulation dies when exposed to directness. And now, after 5 shadows, after silence, urgency, lies, guilt, and division, You might be wondering, how do I take this knowledge into my life tomorrow? How do I anchor it in the real world? Here are 5 ways. At work, when your boss tries to rush you with a false deadline, say, "I'll give you a proper answer tomorrow." Refuse to sell your clarity for panic. In relationships, when someone tries to guilt you into submission, say, "I hear you, but my decision stands." Respect without surrender. On social media, when you see a claim repeated everywhere, pause. Repetition is not truth. Verification is. With friends, when one tries to pit you against another, say, "Let's all talk together." Kill triangulation with light. And within yourself, when silence weighs heavy, use it as meditation. Make the manipulator's weapon your training ground. Remember how we began? I asked why silence can scream louder than words, why urgency enslaves, why lies become truth, why guilt masquerades as love, why division thrives. Now you see the answer. These are not truths, they are tactics, and every tactic collapses the moment you recognize it. The philosopher's gym is always open. Every manipulation is also an invitation to mastery. Every shadow is a chance to grow sharper, calmer, freer. But this is only the beginning, because if silence, urgency, lies, guilt, and division are the first shadows, what happens when suffering itself becomes the teacher? That's the journey we will walk next. If you felt this shift tonight, join us. Subscribe to the Self-Mastery Movement, because the path doesn't end when this video closes. The path begins the moment you open your eyes to it.